Welcome back to the workshop for session 11. This time we're going to be focusing on learning Let It Be, all three sections. We'll also start playing chords with bass notes other than their roots. So let's get started with Let It Be. For the beginning part of checking out Let It Be, we're going to be starting with the verse. Before we start, just a word about fingering. In session 11, we went through the fingering of how to play these chords for Let It Be. But I just want to remind you that a good fingering is one that fits comfortably under your hand and makes the progression sound good. So if you have an easier time playing this chord this way than this way, then by all means, please do it. I'm just making fingering suggestions. So we'll start with the C major triad in root position. And the next chord is G in first inversion. And then we're at an A minor chord in root position. And then we're at that F color chord that we learned that we don't really know the name of yet. But I'm going to tell you what it is now. It's actually called an F major 7 chord, and we'll cover those in a session to come. And then the next chord after that, which moves down one note on the top note, that's called an F6 chord, which we'll also cover in a session to come. Then we're back to a C chord in second inversion, a G chord in root position, and then F in first inversion, and we go down and play that 2-note chord while our left hand plays E, D, C in eighth notes. So let's try that whole first phrase. It goes like this. Notice when we got to that A minor chord, we played 2 eighth notes before going to those F color chords. So once more, the first phrase of Let It Be goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're at the second phrase. The second phrase starts with a C major triad, but this time we're in second inversion. And then we go to a G root position triad. And then to an F first inversion triad. And then in our right hand we play the bottom 2 notes of that chord, while the left hand goes up to E, D, C. So starting again from that F first inversion chord, that whole sequence goes. So let's play that whole second phrase. 1, 2, 3, 4. So make sure when you play the bass note of that F chord that you have your 5th finger down on that F chord, so you have enough fingers to get up to that E, D, and C. So let's just play that part of it. F chord with the small right hand chord while the left hand goes E, D, C. So that brings us to the chorus. And the chorus starts on an A minor chord. So remember, we talked about the concept of relative major and minor keys. Relative major and minor keys share the same key signature, the same number of sharps and flats, and they're related by the sound of them. Check out C, which is where we started the verse of Let It Be, and then A minor, where we started the chorus. So it's easy to get from a section that starts in C to a section that starts in A minor. Hence the name relative minor. So the chorus of Let It Be starts on that A minor root position triad. And then we have another color chord that has the right hand notes G, B, C, and E, with a G note in the bass. This is actually called a C major 7 chord. And we'll do a whole session on major seventh chords in a session to come. So after that C major seventh chord with a G in the bass, we have an F first inversion triad with an F in the bass, and then back to C in second inversion. And then the second half of the chorus is exactly the same as the end of the verse. C to G, and then F with those little passing notes, E, D, C, while the bottom of the right hand plays that small chord. So again, that second half of the chorus goes. Now when we get to the interlude of Let It Be, there's two different ways to finger that. I'm going to show you the easier one to start with, and then we'll go to the more difficult one after that. The easier way to finger that is just to use that claw concept that we talked about when we went over Lean On Me, which is just to use the same fingering and move it from chord to chord. We're going to start on an F and an A above middle C, and we're going to use fingers 1 and 3. And using our claw, we're going to go down the notes, the white notes, F, A, E, G, D, F, C, E. And then continuing on down, we have B flat, D, A, C, G, B, F, A, E, G. So the whole sequence goes like this. So that's the right hand part for the interlude on Let It Be. And while the right hand does that, the left hand plays an octave, 1 octave below middle C and 2 octaves below middle C. So the hands together sound like this. And then the left hand goes to G, F, C on those last 3 chords. So let's play that interlude together. 1, 2, 3, 4. G, F, C. And then we play the interlude an octave higher while the left hand stays in the same position. Now when we get to the more advanced portion of practicing Let It Be, we're going to play that same interlude, only this time we're going to use a crossover fingering, going from 4 and 2, and every time we go to the next chord, from 4 and 2 we're going to go to 3 and 1, and then cross back over to 4 and 2, and then to 3 and 1. So doing it this way slowly, that interlude will look like this. And what this does is it gives us practice playing harmony in thirds while crossing over. Which takes a good bit more practice than doing it the other way, but it's a good way to practice playing those thirds and crossing over. So let's try that slowly one time. 4 and 2 on F and A. And then using the same fingering going all the way down, 2 and 4 going to 1 and 3. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we finish on 1 and 2. So let's do that with the left hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. And as you cross those fingers over, pick up 4 and 2 when you cross them over. So now let's try that interlude with the crossover fingering, and this time we'll play the left-hand bass notes, those octaves. We're going to go very slowly, and if you can't keep up, because this is a pretty hard fingering, don't worry about it. Just practice it slowly, hands separately. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then an octave higher. So now let's try the whole song, the verse, the chorus, and the interlude back to back. 1, 2, 3, 4. Verse. The chorus. Now let's try the interlude. Now the interlude an octave higher. So you want to make sure and try playing this along with the Beatles recording, and the form of the tune is a little bit different than that. But you'll hear where the sections are, the verse, the chorus, and the interlude, and now you know how to play all of them so you can play along with the recording. And also know that the introduction of the tune, the intro to the tune, is the same as the verse. And sometimes they'll be playing slightly different chord positions on some of the chords, but the chords are the same. So now let's go over some chords with bass notes other than their roots, or alternate bass chords. And remember, our nugget from this session was this: any chord can be played with a note other than its root in the bass, and these alternate bass notes can be taken from the chord you're playing, from the scale of the key you're playing, or they can be any bass note that sounds good. So let's take a C major triad in root position. And so far we've mostly been playing a C in the bass. Let's see what the other notes of that chord sound like as bass notes. Let's check out a G in the bass. Now we'll try the other note of the C major triad, the E in the bass. Now let's try some of the other notes from the C major scale as bass notes. How about a D in the bass? Now let's try an F in the bass. Now try playing an A in the bass. Now we've actually made a chord that we're going to cover a few sessions down the road called a minor seventh chord. Now let's try a B in the bass. That's actually a quite dissonant sound because you have the B in the bass rubbing up against the C. But as a chord used in passing, it's a really nice effect, and we'll actually use that chord in an exercise that we're going to do later in this workshop. So now let's take an A minor chord and check out some of the bass notes we can play with that other than the root of the chord. Here's the root of A minor in the bass. Now let's try the other notes of that A minor triad as bass notes, starting with E, which is the fifth in the bass. Now let's try a C in the bass, which is the third. Now we'll try the other bass notes of the A minor scale as bass notes, starting with a G, and and then an F. Now we've actually made another chord that we're going to cover in a session coming up called a major seventh chord. And we played one of those major seventh chords and let it be in the chorus. So continuing on with alternate bass notes for A minor, let's try a D with an A minor as a chord and a B. And again, that's a dissonant chord because we got a B rubbing up against that C. But as a passing chord, it can work. So now let's try an exercise using alternate bass notes. The first part of this exercise, we'll use a C major triad in root position. And we'll start with a C in the bass, and then go down to a B in the bass, and then A. So you notice we're going down the notes of the C major scale, and then G. And then we switch to an F chord in second inversion, and we play an E in the bass, D in the bass, and then G in the bass, and then we're back to C with C in the bass. Those right-hand chords we're going to play in eighth notes like this. While the bass notes go down in half notes. So it sounds like this. Then we switch to the F chord. The bass line keeps going down to D, and then up to G, and then we finish on C. Here's a tip on how to use the pedal when you're doing that alternate bass note exercise. Let's go back to the C part of that exercise and hold the pedal down while you play these repeated notes in the right hand, and then change the pedal when the bass note changes. Change it again, change it again. But by holding it down, at least until the bass note changes, you get a nice connection between these repeated C chords. And the same will be true when we do the progression in A minor. We're holding the sustain pedal down until the bass note changes. So let's try that slowly together. Remember, we're only using two chords here. We're using a C major chord in root position and an F major chord in second inversion. And we're playing eighth notes on all the chords, while the bass line goes all the way down in steps. And then up to G at the end, and then back to C. You'll also notice that this progression sounds a lot like the Crosby, Stills and Nash tune, Our House. So let's try it together. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we switch to the F chord. Up to G in the bass. And then back to C. So now we'll do a minor version of that same exercise, starting on an A minor chord, with an A in the bass and the bass descending down the white notes, the same way we did in the C, the same way we did in the major version of that exercise. So we'll have A minor in eighth notes for 2 bars, and then we go to D minor for a bar and a half, and then a half a bar of an E chord, and then finish on A minor. So once again, the chords are A minor, D minor, and then an E in first inversion, and then back to A minor. So hands together, it sounds like this. So the bass notes are A, G, F, E, continuing on down the scale, D, C, B, up to E, and then we finish back on A where we started. So let's try that progression together slowly with both hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you need to practice it hands separately to get all the notes right, by all means do so and put them together slowly at your own pace. As a little workshop bonus, we're going to transpose that progression up to E flat and see what it sounds like and feels like. And don't worry about learning that right off the bat. We just want to hear the different color in the other key and get some practice transposing, which is a good thing to do anytime you learn any progression, because it expands your ability to be able to play through different keys. So we'll do that same Our House progression in C that we did in C, only this time it's going to be in E flat major. And it'll sound like this. So the chords in the right hand are E flat in root position, and A flat in second inversion, and then back to E flat. And the left hand notes go down the notes of the E flat major scale, which are E flat, D, C, B flat, A flat, G, F, B flat, and E flat. So once you have both hands worked out, let's try playing the hands together. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that does it for the music in this session, and you're ready to move on from the session when you can play the Let It Be verse and chorus, when you can play the Let It Be interlude with both fingerings, the claw fingering in time, and the crossover fingering as a slow exercise, and when you can play a C major or A minor triad with the alternate bass notes from their chords and from their scales. Also, you want to be able to play those alternate bass note exercises, major and minor, in the keys of C and A minor. Before we finish up this workshop, a few reminders about how best to use these workshops. When I'm breaking down chords or melodies, as I've done here, if you're already comfortable with the elements that I'm breaking down, notes, fingers, rhythm, use the time working on playing the tune. For example, go right to playing the whole verse, then the chorus, then put them together, then play them with the recording. The reverse is also true. If you need more time to get together individual components, one phrase in one hand or even one chord, take the time you need to break it down. The important thing is mastering what you play, and this mastery depends completely on having all the elements down. Enjoy Let It Be, and I'll see you next time.